Hello, I'm Robert, and fact checker and science blogger, and helping people who are scared, working with the Facebook group Doomsday Debunked, amongst other things. And this, of course, is about COVID-19, and things are, well, they're looking up a bit in some areas. The WHO were a bit more upbeat. They were saying that it's being suppressed in, there's clear signs of it getting suppressed in Europe, in Italy, France, Germany, and Spain. They are very concerned about Africa, as always. And I thought before going into the main body of this, I just talk a little bit about this, the way it's progressed. This shows the influence of one country has on another. So I think our preparedness has very much been to do with past experience, with a few exceptional individuals, and with historical relationships and political relationships. So for instance, China, then in the middle of January, they were already aware for the previous week, from the 11th or so, this can transfer from human to human, and then by the middle of January, the whole of China was ready for it. They locked down Hubei province. Most of the rest didn't even need to do that. They were all prepared. And fever clinics across the whole of China, all the billion people there, much larger than Europe or the United States, and they were all ready for it. And they knew it was very dangerous, and they were very prepared. And that's why, for instance, some parts, even at just one case, or a few hundred cases, and none of them outside of Hubei province had more than 2,000. Now, there are few countries with a very strong political and historical connection with China, and they were very ready very quickly too. So South Korea and Singapore and Taiwan, they were all ready in January as well, all ready for their cases as they arrived. And well, Singapore were a little bit late because it got a big outbreak, and it should have done surveillance of the population rather earlier than they did. But still, far earlier than anywhere in Europe. They still contained theirs at far less than Italy did, say. And Taiwan has also, I think it's the Vice President of Taiwan, has a strong epidemiologist, he's an epidemiologist, so it's no wonder they had a strong response. Then we had a few others like that early on. So the Faroe Islands, then they were ready in January as well, but at the same time as Singapore. And so was the Crown Prince of Bahrain. In this case, because it was a particular science in the Faroe Islands, and he was a veterinary scientist, and he repurposed his laboratory to be able to test COVID-19. And he was already long before they got their cases. And then the Prince of Bahrain, and then he actually had help from John Ashton from the United Kingdom, and who was tearing his hair out that the United Kingdom didn't respond as well. They were ready in January as well, late January. And by the time of the 24th of February, they'd had a month of preparation, and already knew exactly what they had to do, and just rushed into it straight away. And they've contained less than 500 cases so far. Even though they're 1.2 million population, close to Iran, having pilgrims coming back from Iran, could have really taken off in Bahrain, and it didn't, because they were ready. Now, Africa has been ready since January. They were as prompt as the Faroe Islands and Bahrain, and in their case, it's because they've had many devastating epidemics, and Ebola and so on in Africa. So they were very, and they've got weak healthcare system. So in their case, it wasn't a matter of the actually wanting to get ready. Really the problem was just the resources. And luckily, some of including Europe, came forward with $100 million very early on, something of that order. And so paradoxically, although we were very late in responding and very slow in responding ourselves, we provided big funds for Africa early on. So we helped Africa to be ready in January, even though we weren't even remotely ready in March, or even through to April. You could say we're not really ready. But we did fund the WHO to prepare Africa. And so Africa certainly was much stronger than it would have been if the EU hadn't funded it. So that makes it particularly paradoxical that Italy was so unprepared, and France and Germany and Spain, given we'd given so much funding to Africa, to the WHO to fund Africa. And then USA, they were very late responding as well for really doing it properly like everyone else is doing. But they did come in very quickly, late March. But it's this delay, so people just aren't affected so quickly by people that they haven't got such a historical connection with. Now in the UK, we didn't listen to the very urgent warnings of Italy, and only now in April are we listening to Germany, which is, we've got a very close historical connection. Our royal family has a very strong historical connection, dates back to Germany. So we are listening, and we're getting Germany in the news in far more, not just all the deaths and so on, but actually how they did it. And now at last we're getting people talking about South Korea and how they did it. And we're getting people talking now. And so I think the UK, we went on a bit of a false trail, just stopping this contact tracing and testing. But it does look like now we've got lockdown, we can bring it back. So lockdown is an ideal opportunity to start the case isolation and the contact tracing, and that all these other countries have found worked for them. And so, although we weren't ready, and we've gone on a bit of a false track, we can come back on track. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and also about the USA. So USA now has over 500,000 cases, but it is over 50 states, so that's 10,000 average per state, and some states have a lot more and some have very little. And the UK, we have over 70,000, but we're undercounting that by perhaps a factor of 50. So we could have 300,000, we could have quite a lot in the UK. We just don't know because we aren't testing. So what can we do in this situation? So that's what this video is about. So now I go back to the top, and now this is the cases. So they're the Faroe Islands I told you about. They've been prepared since January, in a population of 60,000, and they have tested 10,000 just because this one veterinary scientist was using a lab that he had for testing the virus in salmon in the Faroe Islands. So he's not depending on Denmark. He just did it himself. He would never have managed to do this without this initiative. Just one scientist is responsible for keeping it out of the Faroe Islands. I've got a picture of him down here. This scientist single-handedly is keeping it out of the Faroe Islands because he adapted his test, and he said it's very easy to adapt. The only thing I changed was some of the ingredients. In our normal work it is specific to fish virus and fish bacteria, and in this case I just changed the 3 components specific to the coronavirus. So how many scientists do we have in the United Kingdom that could have done the same thing? This is only 60,000 people. Chris knows how many scientists we have in the UK with similar skills. But our NHS is not authorising them to do this sort of stuff. That's the problem. They're being very tightly controlled on who can do the tests and make sure they check them all. And then they're just not letting enough people do them. And this is absolutely vital. They don't seem to realise the importance. This is Bahrain, as I told you about, and it's got a task force ready on the 24th. There's the first case, January. I told you about all that. Only 6 deaths. So, but the numbers were, so this is 60,000, this is 1.2 million. Now what I'm saying is that the United Kingdom is not a single country. It's a single country, but it's divided up into Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and other areas like Cornwall and Devon, or wherever country you are, whatever region you are, all the different regions of the United Kingdom, and they all have different amounts. And for instance, where I am in the Highlands, we have very few cases so far. So why can't we do what the Faroe Islands did? I'm on the Isle of Mull. We have 3,000 people. And I just want to tell you about the Faroe Islands. So this was a tiny, tiny little population. And where's Faroe Islands? And that's Professor John Ashton, who was part of the team that helped Bahrain to contain its outbreak. And he's just tearing his hair out because he can't do anything in the United Kingdom. He knows exactly what we have to do. But we are governed by our government, of course. He's got no jurisdiction here. And so he's there and he's just saying, do this, do this, do this. And then nobody's listening. Just so sad. But we are at last getting some people listening. And we had I've got the video. This was to say that I think Maggie Thatcher, I'm no fan of her politics, but I'm just going to let her talk for a little bit.
I have great pleasure in welcoming the...
Yeah.
During his historic voyage through the South Seas on the Beagle.
So there, she talks about the... she's a scientist, she knows all about science. Just talking about Darwin and the Beagle. And this was telling everyone that we absolutely have to act on climate change, and that was back in 1989. I think that if Maggie Thatcher had been around today and she was our PM, then I think she would have been onto it in January, just like Taiwan was, and just like the Faroe Islands, because she was an experimentalist scientist, and we've got these theoreticians, and theoreticians aren't very good at they're very, very slow at responding to experimental data, theoretical people who've got their eyes in models. And she was an experimental scientist. She would have been onto the experimental data right away in January. I'm sure she would have. Say, I'm no fan of her politics, but I can't help but respect her integrity and her science. And here's Devi Sridhar, Professor of Global Health, saying the WHO recommendations, test, trace and isolate, is our exit strategy. So I was just going to say, I want to keep this short, so I don't want to say too much. But so I'll just check for that. I've got that on the page somewhere. Yes, for Uganda. They a little over 3,000 inhabitants, and I don't seem to have got the link there. I'll pop it in. They cleared out all cases in the hospital, and first of all, so this is where we should start. I'm just going to talk about that and then I'll finish. So anyway, but I'll talk about this, what they did in Italy. They had a little over 3,000 inhabitants. They tested everyone there, absolutely everyone, whether they had the symptoms or not. All those 3,000 people they tested, they found 3% that were positive, and they isolate all the positives in the entire population of Uganda. Then, a fortnight later, they tested everyone again, the entire population, found only 0.3% were positive. And then, after that, there were no new cases, and it was gone. So, suppose that 3% of the Isle of Mull, where I am, have it now. I don't know if it's as bad as that. It might be much less than that, in which case we could get it over quickly. Suppose we have, say, 100 or so people in the Isle of Mull who have it today. Then we could just test everyone, isolate those 100 people, and then nobody else would get it, because they've all been isolated. And then a fortnight later, we'd be down to, just a handful of people, and then we'd be gone. And maybe nobody would die at all. Or very few. And this is what any small region of the United Kingdom could do. Cornwall could do it. Some little provincial town could do it. If we could only have this delegating and community empowerment, or some way to permit this to happen at the community level, to do this case isolation, testing, and if we could really ramp up the cases. So the government just hasn't got its heart. It says it's going to ramp up to 100,000 cases a day at the end of April. But that's far too late and far too little. If we want to do this, we've got to be ramping up to 1 million cases a day. There's no reason why we can't do that. And if you can build lots of hospitals in 14 days, you convert stadiums and things into temporary field hospitals in 2 weeks. Then what about setting up new labs, empowering labs that we have, and producing thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of tests, 1 million tests a day? And then they just don't realise yet. This is the key. This is how to do it. It's absolutely important. It's not just testing to see where it is in the population. This is how you absolutely stop it. So, but then our top priority, absolute top priority, is to deal with I'm just going to talk about, it was a sneaky disease, and now I'll talk about the health things. So it's a very sneaky disease, and that's the reason why we have this slow delay. because for the first week, if you suddenly got 1,000 cases in your country, and it ramps up very quickly, tenfold in a fortnight. So from 100 you can go to 1,000 in a fortnight, you can go to 10,000 another fortnight. You've got 10,000 cases, but by the second fortnight when you ramped up to 100 to 10,000, during that period you won't have hardly anyone in intensive care yet. That happens in the third week. So you can go from 100 to 10,000. At that point you've got hardly anyone in intensive care, but out of that 10,000, then 5%, so maybe 5%, 10,500 I think, then those will be intensive care at some point. And a fair number are going to die, and then it's going to ramp up and up and up and up, because at that point you've got a lot many infected before you even when you get to 10,000 cases and you're 500 in intensive care and you start noticing, then you've already infected all the people for the next fortnight, a lot of them. So you've probably got tens of thousands at that point, and that's why it's so sneaky. And why countries are so slow. They sort of think, this is nothing, we're dealing with it. Look, we've got 10,000 cases and hardly anything's happened yet. And then they're whammed with it. And then they get all their doctors dying. And that's what's happened around the world, one place after another. And it's very difficult. It's people at home as well. It's sneaky for the people at home. So they think, this is just like flu. It just feels mild. And then it does get a bit worse and it feels like pneumonia. And you get these people just self-medicating when they start feeling breathless. This is absolutely wrong. Don't self-medicate if you've got COVID-19 and you start feeling breathless. You can die. The problem is lack of oxygen. And some people, you have two kinds of cases, the ones that go breathless, the ones that don't, but their lungs stop working, and they just are like high altitude climbers. They think they're breathing enough, they're not getting enough oxygen into their lungs, and their lips go blue. So if that happens also, that's very emergency. You need to contact the emergency care straight away, because there's no home remedy that can compensate, that can fix a low level of oxygen in your blood. And that is the problem. And that is why quite a few people die, and why in the places where they're really on top of it, they have, like Germany, has medical students ringing up everyone who has been tested and they've got mild COVID-19, checking that they are okay, and getting them into hospital if anything like this happens, right away. And you can save many lives by doing that. Our country is not doing that. It's not even testing them. Never mind ringing them up and saying, have you got blue lips? Are you having any breathlessness? And the other things that they say, persistent pain and pressure in the chest, new confusion or inability to arouse. And they say it's not inclusive. So these people who are isolating at home, they shouldn't be just sitting around saying, I've got flu. If I get very breathless and I can hardly speak a word, then I'll ring up the hospital. They should have medical people contacting them once a day. And that's what they do. And then we're just not doing this, and the reason we're not doing it in the UK is not because the government is callous. It's because, our Prime Minister is a classicist. He knows nothing. He's not a scientist. He's done everything properly. He followed the advice of the SAGE group, and they are heavily influenced by a group of modelers, and the modelers have absolutely very, very little interest. Like most modelers, they're not very interested in experimental data. And they don't even know how to investigate, to find the experimental data. They're advising our government, but they don't have a clue about how to design an experiment. They just work with their models en masse. And they're not listening to the experimental data from China and from South Korea. And for instance, very clear example, they have said we should do a 7-day isolation period. The experimental data is absolutely clear. It should be at least 3 weeks. It was 3 weeks for SARS. How can they not know it was 3 weeks for SARS? And then for COVID-19, then it seems to be even longer than for SARS. And the WHO say that you've got to quarantine people either until they die, isolate them if they've got either until they die, or until 2 weeks after symptoms have completely disappeared, or until they get 2 negative tests, PCR tests, 24 hours apart. The United Kingdom is just ignoring that advice because it's using the advice of these theoretical modelers who say 7 days and say it's like flu. we must change course immediately. And then this is what I say about the I just did a very simple calculation. All I did was get the mortality rates by age, the case fatality rates by age group, and the WHO said yesterday that they're very concerned because they've heard that in some countries 10% of the health workers have COVID-19. Now, we just don't know how many have it in the UK. We know that quite a lot of nurses and doctors are isolating at home with that 7-day rule, or with a 14-day rule because someone in a household has it. And I don't know how reliable these figures are, but last week the BBC was saying that 50% in some UK hospitals are off sick, and in the Scotland there's several percent that are extra, that are off sick because it's related to coronavirus, and the number infected in the hospitals is likely to be more than that because of the delay between infection and diagnosis, and then the delay between diagnosis and then with the mild cases we don't even have the diagnosis in the United Kingdom, and they're infectious for up to 2 days, sometimes more than that, sometimes even 10 days, but usually the previous 2 days. A few are infectious before they develop the symptoms, and many are infectious when they just get rather mild symptoms where it's not very clear that it's COVID-19. You just feel rather low and not very healthy. And you can well imagine in a situation where the health service are just working so hard on dealing with this situation that they feel a little bit tired, and it's actually COVID-19 and they don't realise it because they're working so hard. There may well be many cases, they're just not testing them. They said they'd ramp up on healthcare tests. I hope that would be that, and it wasn't. It was testing nurses at home to try and find the ones that don't have COVID-19. So this is my figure. If 10% of NHS staff get COVID-19, and it's not impossible they have already, then the 250 doctors and 140 nurses may die, and several thousand need intensive care. In Italy, over 100 doctors have died. And this is not because, so I just want to make it very, very clear, it's just a bit of a red herring, the whole thing about whether they had enough protective WHO explained that here. Where is it? One, some are infected in their homes or communities outside their healthcare facilities. So the United Kingdom, then self-isolating for only 7 days is not long enough, so they come back to work, they've still got it. Or else they are isolating as a household with the rest of their family. They should not do that. Or they should treat anyone in their family as if they were a COVID-19 patient, with doing proper protection, at least both wearing masks and washing their hands whenever they're going in and out of their room, keeping them well isolated from the rest of the family. Even if they suspect that, they should test them, see if they've got COVID-19. So it's absolute top priority. They should go around all the health workers who are self-isolating. They should do that with everyone, but at least with those to start with, first of all, it's top priority. Find out if they really are self-isolating with the COVID-19 case. If so, they should, best of all, remove all the healthcare workers from that situation, or rather, move the COVID-19 case away. Make sure there's no connection, because 80% of those with COVID-19 do not transmit it to anyone. That's the experience in Japan. So if you take, so that's not from China, had a similar experience. Japan, very clear. And so if you're self-isolating in a household with someone with COVID-19, you probably don't have it yet. So you need to remove that COVID-19 patient out of the household. It could be days, weeks before you get it from them. So that should be our top priority. And we need to, and then some are infected in the health facilities because of late recognition of COVID-19, but we've got very late recognition. If people come in, they've just got mild symptoms, they're not even going to know that they've got it. They go in because they've twisted their ankle or something. So we have loads of ways for it to get into the healthcare system. It's been the experience of people of other countries that given even the slightest chance, it does get into the healthcare system. So it's not at all impossible. It is now moving to our healthcare system. If any of you are in the healthcare, then regard everyone in your hospital as possibly having COVID-19 unless it's been cleared. Keep up the precautions with everyone. You're washing your hands and all that, and not touching your eyes, nose and face except with clean hands and physical distancing where you can. And then we've got to help Africa. But then, so now the positive things, just to end. So some more positive things. First of all, I said that we have these possibly 250 doctors and 140 nurses. Now, hopefully we can reduce those death rates, because they have these big solidarity trials that are testing many drugs around the world. So now it doesn't mean this is vitally important that they test it properly, because if not, these drugs that you use to treat people that seem anecdotally to work, then they may actually, in some cases, for instance, there was this story about one of the combinations they're looking at may be causing heart attacks. So you absolutely don't want to have that. And so you've got to look at whether it is beneficial all round to the patient. The more recover and get out than die if you're using this medication. And you've got to check that you've got to check that it's not the placebo effect. So placebo effect is very, very strong. Give people a white pill and say, I'm a doctor and this is good for you. And this strongly stimulates their body to heal themselves. So if you have very convinced doctors giving what they think is a brand new medicine to lots of patients, then that absolute conviction that they have in their medicine can by itself cause them to be cured, just through stimulating their health system and very strong immune response and so on. It actually works. Placebo effect works. It's not just a myth. It actually works. If you can convince yourself and eat something and convince yourself it's very good for you, then it helps you. So, but then that medicine, then, if it gets rolled out, then they might as well be giving all the doctors sugar pills. Let's give them this. So you've got to be very, very careful, double-blind, where the doctors themselves do not know if what they're giving is a sugar pill or this fancy new medicine. And that's why you've got to do these double-blind trials. That's why it's so important. As well as the possibility of all different kind of complicating factors that there might be, that in some particular situation, maybe they in that particular hospital, at the same time as they had the new medicine, they had a much better way of doing the ventilation and they're not controlling for that, so on. And they're just diagnosing and treating the patients better in other ways. So, or just that you've got a whole batch of people who genetically just happen to be very much well able to fight it off for some peculiar reason, that one particular village, they all get it. It just so happens all those people in that village are genetically related, and they've all got some factor we haven't identified yet that helps them fight it off more quickly. There could be loads and loads of confounding reasons why a non-randomized trial can just be completely wrong, even though it's very convincing to the researcher who did it. So anyway, so we're going to have these medicines actually tested properly probably a few weeks from now, maybe sooner. So it may well be that it's soon enough to make a very big difference to these doctors and nurses. So that's one very positive thing. Then another positive thing is that the so I'm not going to try and do everything, say everything here. So and protect yourself. Hopefully you've all read about how and seen my things about how to protect yourself. So you can read that up again. It's very, very simple, straightforward stuff. But you've got to get completely into the routine of washing your hands thoroughly and not touching your eyes, nose and mouth with unwashed hands. It's only the big droplets that you cough, sneeze, or talk, or laugh, and those fall to ground in seconds. So if you keep a metre away, that's far enough. And if you're walking side by side, you don't get it by breathing. So if you're walking side by side and not talking, for instance, even if you're a foot apart, you wouldn't get it. It's very different from flu. Anyway, but now there's one more optimistic thing that may help turn this all around. So there's quite a lot of good, positive news, and I'm saying this to help scared people. So one other positive thing is that the vaccine, so there's a professor of vaccinology in Oxford University, he told the Times she was 80% confident that their vaccine would work, with human trials to begin next fortnight, and she thinks that it'll be available, and then the government would be willing to manufacture the doses in advance. So this is the big problem with vaccines, that if they took until September to get this vaccine or everything sorted out, then they would have another several months through to next year before they can make them all, because you could scale up the production. The UK government and the US is doing the same with their vaccines. The US is pursuing a different vaccine. The UK is pursuing another vaccine. We are going to scale up and be ready to produce the vaccine doses by the time it's ready. This is a huge risk. A commercial company can't do that, but the government can. And you can just say, well, maybe there's a 50-50 chance it's going to work. We couldn't, as a commercial venture 50-50 chance just throwing a heads or tails that is going to work to just ramp up and produce millions of doses. But the government can do that. That it would be ready as soon as that, and it'd be the right vaccine, and they wouldn't have to just start again and make another vaccine. So, but she said they're an 80% chance. So, 80% chance, that still means 1 in 5 chance you just lose all that money. But the government is ready to do that. And we have at least 20 different teams working on different ideas for vaccines. And the vaccine, just say that, then I've got to stop. So the vaccine is very tricky. If we get this vaccine, it'll be the first coronavirus vaccine ever. Because the coronavirus, it's very difficult to do a vaccine to a coronavirus because our immune systems don't seem to be very strong for coronaviruses. A quarter of our colds are coronaviruses, and you can get exactly the identical same gene sequence cold over and over again, year after year. Your immune system builds up antibodies, but then they fade away, and it comes again, and you have to start again. And with SARS and MERS, we have no idea what would happen. These are different, they're novel coronaviruses coming to the body for the first time, and there were no examples of reinfection for either SARS or MERS. So we have no idea how protective the antibodies are for those. And so COVID-19, we don't know what the antibodies are going to do. But what we did find with early vaccines for SARS is that the vaccines could trigger an adverse reaction that actually triggered an antibody that actually made the disease worse rather than protecting you. So it's called perverse signaling in the immune system, where it produces the antibodies that make things worse. Especially when you've got low levels of antibodies. It happens with dengue fever, and it happens with SARS. At least it happens with SARS, similar reaction with the vaccines. We don't have any experience of infecting people again with SARS, but with the vaccines, and some vaccines stimulate antibodies that have this effect. So, they found a way around it, and if you took just one spike from the SARS vaccine, SARS virus, and used that to create the antibodies, it created the right kind of antibodies. So it's a question of making a vaccine that makes the right kind of antibody to protect you rather than make things worse. So that is why it's so very, very tricky. But luckily, we have got all the work for SARS, and this is such a similar virus that you can do the same idea. They're just taking a spike out of COVID-19, just like they did out of SARS, and then hopefully that fixed it with SARS and stopped, because without doing it that way with SARS, then they triggered, one of their vaccines actually caused the lung to attack itself. The opposite of what you want. But doing the spike thing made it work, and was protective, and they were very close to being able to roll out a vaccine for SARS. They had it already when SARS stopped. So because of all that work on SARS, that is why they could get off so some of the teams had a vaccine candidate ready within 1 day of having the gene sequence. They just found the spike and made it into their vaccine. In the new thing, they just snipped off the spike. I'm sure it was not as easy as that, but they just sort of snip. Here we are. We've got a vaccine. Sure, it's much more complicated than that in reality, but that's the basic idea. One of the first teams, they just snipped a spike off the COVID-19 virus, and that was their vaccine ready in a day. So ready, as in they had the actual vaccine for a day. The long period of time is the testing, very rigorous testing in animals and in humans to check it's not having an adverse reaction and to check that it does actually protect you. And then once we got it, we may have to do it again. So it's not necessarily it's going to be forever that you're protected by just being vaccinated once. And it's going to be a huge program, and we're going to have to vaccinate most of the 7.5 billion people in the world with this vaccine. So it's going to be a huge, huge thing. And then they might, who knows, they might need more than one shot. So, but we can do it. And it's absolutely, oh yes, so that's what I'll end. I end with a very positive thing, how we're all pulling together. I've just talked about, we've pulled together so much on the medical side. We are actually pulling together, so we are actually pulling together here. All these countries are helping each other. All these conspiracy theories saying China did this to try and harm the world or something, absolutely opposite. China's being doing the very best it can to help all the other countries. It sends its teams to Iran, to Italy. People advise it's sending ventilators and masks and equipment that it's got because it's closing. It's no longer needs it now because it's all over in China, and it's doing its best to help the rest of the world. And then all these countries, they're helping each other. As I said, Europe was helping Africa, even when Europe wasn't, paradoxically, even when Europe wasn't preparing for itself, it was giving big funds to the WHO to prepare Africa. So Africa was ready long before Europe. And it did it because of the European funds, was the very first funds, and very early on. The EU did a big fundraiser that helped Africa. And then there's the IMF. And so, it's the very weird, strange kind of social things going on as to why it's so strange that the European Union was so strong on protecting WHO, and yet so weak on protecting Africa through WHO, and yet so very weak on protecting itself. Such a strange thing. Funding Africa so we could have thousands of diagnostic tests and personal protection equipment, and yet not creating its own diagnostic tests, personal protection equipment. Who would have thought? Never seen anything like it. Anyway, so this is some of the other things going on. The World Food Organization has now got a fleet of 8. World Food Programme it's got a fleet of 8 747s, 8 cargo planes, and many smaller planes that it's using to move medical supplies and personnel around the world. And that's several $100 million just doing that. And then it's asking for donations. I'm sure they're going to come forward to actually buy all these medical supplies and things to supply all these countries that are so short of them now. And the IMF, they have released $1 trillion war chest that's to protect jobs in developing countries, to finance the weaker healthcare systems during the COVID-19 crisis. There's never been anything even remotely as huge as that. $1 trillion is a lot for developing countries, for countries with developing emerging economies. And the whole world, this matters to the whole world. This $1 trillion is very important for the whole world because these countries here are shutting down. Like India has just had this big shutdown. When a country shuts down, it can no longer, its workers have all got to go home. And it's producing goods for the rest of the world, it no longer can. But the worst thing of all, this has the potential of permanent damage to our world economy. Because if a business goes, so lots and lots of small businesses go bankrupt in India because of the pandemic, then everyone in the rest of the world who depends on products from India, then they're no longer being produced because all these businesses have gone out of business. Same in Africa. And you have farmers producing things that we're eating in the rest of the world. But if all the farmers have gone bankrupt, then they can no longer buy the seeds, they can no longer buy the machinery, they can no longer employ people to work their farms. And the home people at home just running their own small things. They can no longer, they've lost their little, they've no longer been able to look after their little bit of whatever it is they had that they were using to grow the things they take to market that then end up in United States or United Kingdom. So the whole world depends on these economies continuing, and the situation has been so good in Africa. They've been hugely improving, greatly reduced their child mortality, greatly improved their healthcare, greatly improved their economies and their resources and their well-being over the last few decades. And the risk is that this pandemic would set that back and go back. And we definitely do not want that to happen for them and for the whole world. So the IMF has released this $1 trillion. Amongst other things, it's going to pay off the debt repayments. So many people in the West probably don't know that, I mean, we talk about the US having its debt, but that Sub-Saharan Africa has its debt, and it has a pretty massive debt for its own economies, which is due to funding of several projects in order to bring them forward, and also some kind of things that happened in the past, such as various accidents, such as the oil crisis, that led to them being saddled with debts that weren't really their fault. And so they've got some debts that are not their fault, and other debts that are just them financing and moving forward and developing their economy. And these debts have to be serviced. So it's like someone with a mortgage, and if you lose you can no longer repay your mortgage, then you lose your home. So the wealthy countries, through the IMF and through a separate fund, which is called the whatever it is, something Solidarity Fund, I can't remember. You can look it up in my article and the links. But anyway, this fund is then they're actually paying the debt repayments for Africa and emerging economies for the period of the crisis. So all these debts that they've taken on for either through historical mistakes in things they just didn't know that this crisis was going to happen, it did, or for whatever reason, or because they've got some big project like a dam or some big agricultural project or something they're doing that they needed funding for, and they just can't pay it back at the same time as managing the health crisis, and at the same time as doing a lockdown and feeding all their workers, and at the same time as the reduction of money from imports, and at the same time as the fleeing of safe money. So people who invested in these things, they're just moving $15 billion, which is a lot for these countries, has moved out of these countries because of investors who are scared of what's going to happen to them. So they're triple whammy or more, and the IMF is directly supporting them through this, and it's giving them direct funding, direct grants. It's totally paying off these debt repayments. So not saying that not postponing it, not saying, oh, you don't need to do it now, but you'll have to pay double next year. They're just not paying it at all. They're totally paid off. So some of them are already totally paid off. They are doing emergency direct grants. For instance, Rwanda applied to them, and that was the first one. They got an emergency direct grant because they just couldn't cope. And so anything that's an absolute emergency, then the IMF is giving them direct grants. And they're giving zero interest loans, and they're just doing all sorts of fancy economic things that I don't even understand, to do with dollar liquidity. I haven't a clue what that's all about. But the IMF is doing huge amounts to help these emerging economies to stay afloat during the economy. So this is such a positive thing that's going on, that it's certainly, I'm sure a lot of it is motivated out of just pure human compassion. We can't let Africa lose all of its gains over the last decade. And it's also, the whole world is in this together, and we're recognising this more and more with this pandemic. That more and more we're recognising that we're in this together, that that if Africa goes down because of the pandemic, all of us do. Not that we're going to have collapse of civilization, but things would get very seriously difficult. And and support. Have to find lots of workarounds, lots of things that you don't buy you can't buy your bananas anymore. You just don't have bananas in the shops because the country that exports bananas to you has gone bankrupt, and all its businesses are no longer in business. So the whole world is in this together, and we're actually recognising it and working together in an absolutely remarkable way. Now, so yes, I'll just say one more thing. Oh well, never mind. This is going to be quite long. Sometimes mine too, but it's little self-contained nuggets anyway. The last thing I just want to say, because I know people in the group, in Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked, are very scared about this, and some of them, and that is climate change. And what is this pandemic doing to action on climate change? And there's been the postponement of COP26 from this year to next year. So they sort of say, oh, does this mean we're not going to do anything on climate change? So, okay, we get over this pandemic and then the world's going to pop because of climate change. No, it doesn't mean that at all. So, just before this started, things were looking very good for the climate, for COP26, despite all the sensationalist press, not that, the mainstream media are always looking at the black side of everything. The COVID-26, we already had 121 countries before this all started that said they're going to pledge to zero emissions by 2050. And China previously, in the year before, 2018, they had already said they're going to aim for zero emissions by 2070. No, not 2070, later this century, sorry, not 2070, later this century. So this then got forgotten about because of the trade war with the US and their preoccupations with this thing and that, and now this thing, the coronavirus. But once this is all over, so I think it's a very wise move to postpone COP26 to next year, autumn next year instead of autumn this year. For one thing, it's held in the UK, and with the lockdown it just wasn't practical to organise it. So even if we get over this in a few weeks or months, even if we get over this, say by June, then it'd be too late to organise such a big international conference by October or whenever it was. So we had to do it anyway. And the Olympics postponed in Japan as well, similar kind of thing. But next year we can have the Olympics, we can have the COP26, and I'm not quite sure what's happening with the Olympics. Is it next year? Anyway, so we're going to have COP26, and with COP26, what we've discovered so much with this, it's such a huge increase in teleworking and teleconferencing across different continents. And although this is just a minor aspect of the whole thing, it is still significant. And it is very likely that when we resume at the end of this, after several months of teleworking, for some people, several weeks to months, then they're going to realise we can telework. Never realised that we can do so much by teleworking. And then that's going to reduce at least some of the travel. And then it's the same with especially the plane travel, and people have been travelling around. So sometimes you have to, medical workers have to travel by plane, but sometimes you don't have to, and people are discovering this more and more. So that's one positive for climate change from this. Another positive, which is just a kind of psychological thing, we are surely going to have a reduction in CO2 emissions this year because it was levelling out anyway. And there's always the question, the CO2 emissions are going down over half of the world, I think it is. A large percentage, I'd have to look that up, going down in the United States very slowly, over California quite quickly, quickly. Europe is going down quickly, and over large parts of the world, then not quickly enough for 2050 yet, but by quickly I mean still quite fast compared to what it was before. And so China is the main place where it was still increasing significantly. It was levelling off, and it's sort of waving up. Some years it goes up, and sometimes it's sort of steady. And so we're going to get a dip down from China, and we're going to get a dip down from the rest of the world as well, just because of the reduced travel and the reduced everything, people staying at home, and reduced industry as well. So when this stops, then we get a bit of a ramp up, but if it's long enough, we have a significant reduction. And so we may well get a bit of a dip from the carbon dioxide for this year, which is a psychological boost and seeing, oh, at last we're beginning to go down. And then this is the direction we can follow. But then the very big thing that we can do, it's another year for renewables to go down in price. And they're going down in price very, very fast. And the solar power particularly is already competitive with fossil fuels. Even the lowest cost fossil fuels in the United Kingdom, which is a long way north of the equator. And it's competitive with our lowest cost fossil fuels for power generation. And another year is another several percent, whatever it is, increase in its edge over fossil fuels. It makes more and more sense to do the renewables. The cost of renewables and power station is going down all the time. So by 2026, when we have the COP26, we're going to have even more competitive renewables. Low cost batteries for electric cars, gradually mapping. We have these electric planes for short haul flights, which should be ready sometime in 2020, 21, that sort of timescale. We should start having short haul flights with electric planes. So this is just right for when this coronavirus comes, when we come back out of the coronavirus and we're restarting industry, and with that $1 trillion war chest and all that's not all of it. Individual countries are putting billions and billions into it as well, into doing something about this. I can't remember. The US has put a vast amount. I don't want to say the number because I don't want to misquote, but it was a huge amount, was it? I won't say it, perhaps some of you will know. I don't want to say a number that I got it wrong, but there's huge amounts are going into fighting COVID-19, and then when it's over, then this is the time to really boost the renewables and sustainable energy. And so many countries, I think, will take an advantage of that. That the stimulus packages, so when you've got the end of a recession, so when you've got a recession, then that means people aren't buying so much. You lose jobs, businesses close, sometimes business close down, they reduce their productive capacity, and then for the duration of the recession, then it's low. And then you have a rebound at the end, where you have a huge increase in stimulus, because people want to buy all the things they couldn't buy during the recession. That is the moment where we could use that huge increase to stimulate new industry, new renewables, new sustainable industries, new industries that are protecting nature services and biodiversity. And this is our great opportunity, a new opportunity for the climate change. So that's where I'm going to end with a positive thing, that this is, it's so terrible, it's so sad, there's so many people dying, absolutely so sad, that we have to do what we can to stop it, to control it, and then just remember, on a personal level, you absolutely can protect yourself. Don't forget that, just don't forget. Just keep it up. For as long as this continues, keep up with the washing your hands, keep up with not touching your eyes, nose and mouth, keep up with the physical distancing from the people, from anyone else who has even the slightest chance of having it. But you don't need to worry about breathing. You don't need to worry about sitting in the same train as someone if you're not talking to them. You don't need to worry about sitting next to someone on the park bench, so long as you're not touching your eyes, nose and mouth. What you've got to worry about and be very careful about is if they're talking to you, but just bear in mind that it is only very limited situations. It's not like flu. It seems to be that it's in some kind of social gatherings where there's an awful lot of interaction between the people, and in households over a very long period of time, and in medical care facilities like hospitals, in care homes, in cruise ships, famously, but not for breathing, but just because the people are in very close contact with lots of other people over a long period of time. And that's when you have to be especially careful. Anyway, I've got to stop. I'm going on for nearly an hour, and I will stop here. And so, if you are interested in, if you need help with these sorts of things, please join our group, Doomsday Debunked on Facebook, please be sure to read the rules at the top of the group before you post or comment. You don't need to read them just to read the posts, obviously, but before you do any posts or comments, please look at the rules, list the headers for each rule, and then have an idea of what they are about. Because this is very important. We are rule-based. We have a quarter of us, of the people in the group, are autistic, and so 3/4 are not, but a quarter are autistic at a guess, and some also, and it's very important for autistic people who are not able to respond to social signals, they just can't pick up social signals, for it to be strictly rule-based, and it only works if everyone follows the rules strictly. So please, bear in mind that a large number are autistic, and they need you to follow the rules as well as following the rules themselves. It is strictly rule-based. If you get muted or blocked, very rare to get blocked if you get muted, it's because you've just not followed one of our rules. We are very strict about this. And then just follow the rules, and then we just mute you, and you say to you, this was the rule, you need to follow this rule, will you agree to follow it? And you just say yes, then we immediately unmute you, and that's how we do it. And that is the key to the success of our group. So again, please don't be offended if you do get muted. It happens quite a bit, and it's our way of enforcing the rules, and they are what make the group work, and how. And if you are a great, we particularly welcome people who are very good at reassuring people who are scared, as well as the scared people, and people who are good at fact checking, like I've been doing just now. The links are in the video description, and do join this channel as well if you want to see more of these.